as increasing numbers of companies attempt to project an eco-friendly greenwashing and how to spot it. But we start with the art of getting noticed, because none of what I've just mentioned matters if advertisers can't do that. In the overstimulated life of the average consumer, grabbing our attention is crucial for any successful advertising campaign. To do that, the teams behind them need local knowledge. One advert for the Scandinavian airline SAS did just that, but they got more of a reaction than they expected. Robert Serkes and Michael Jurgensen from the & Co advertising agency in Copenhagen told me more about the campaign.
What is truly Scandinavian? Absolutely nothing.
All Scandinavians are really incredibly proud whenever the rest of the world praises Scandinavian democracy or women's rights or parental leave. But the fact is that many things that we call Scandinavian, they are in the world-known Swedish meatballs, but every country has their meatballs. The rumor is that the Swedish meatballs actually have bonds to the Turkish meatballs. So in a both humorous and cheeky way, have a look at all the things that we take for granted as a Nordic trademarks, like the meatballs or windmills, create a brand awareness campaign, all to encourage travelers to keep venturing out in the world so that Scandinavia can become even more Scandinavian.
Tell me then, Robert, if you can start, how the creative process works on an ad like this. You have the idea. What's the life cycle then of bringing this idea to life?
The We Are Travelers campaign is a long campaign. We examine what travel does to us as a human or as a region. We have done several films before, and we're trying to find new angles into the subject. And it's actually the mindset of going out in the world, bringing hope, innovation or new ideas that is maybe the strongest mindset or asset we actually have in Scandinavia, that we are curious and we have the ability to actually take in the world into our own culture and change with it.
What's it like creating adverts for Nordic audiences in particular? What are the unique characteristics of that market that you're trying to appeal to?
We are quite fortunate in the Nordics because we have a very high degree of education throughout the society, which means that we can use the intellectual capacity of the target groups to a high degree. And we can use that to actually create advertising that are interesting to watch. It's a fact that a lot of the advertising you see around the globe and also in the Nordics is boring. We want to use possibilities to actually make something that creates attention, either because it's funny or it's thoughtful or has ideas that makes it interesting to watch and spend your time on.
How did you decide on the mood, on the look, on the feel of the advert? Robert?
It is cheeky. In Scandinavia, we have this a little bit of irony in the way we can talk, and but also in the pictures to capture the Scandinavian atmosphere. This is a quite long and delicate story to tell. And it is an emotional roller coaster, this film. How you are dragged into the provocative question in the beginning. And then we have to unfold the story with examples. And then we have to pick people up again and actually say, this is something good. And the director has a great job of both capturing what is Nordic and the people and the humorous, but also the beauty of our mindset.
What are the cliches in sort of typical airline ads?
Many. Airplanes on the blue sky, really beautiful pictures of beaches and cities and airplanes in the air, famous actors, football players. I mean, just to get the attention of a certain message, which in many cases actually does not have anything to do with the actual message in the ad. We wanted to get around that.
Did it feel like a bold move to subvert the usual airline advert convention?
The message itself has been conveyed throughout, 7 campaigns before this one. But yes, it was on purpose a more bold move to get more attention and to get interest around the ad itself.
And you did something very different. What was the reaction?
It started quite well as a good discussion between both nationalists and globalists, pointing out the pros and cons in the film. And that's how most of our campaigns work. But then hell broke loose. Out of nowhere, we got this international attention.
The campaign was hijacked by the specific part of the internet where you have a lot of people trying to provoke and react into stuff they see in society. Extreme right-wing nationalists, and they were provoked about that. We couldn't say that nothing was really Scandinavian.
I think it was deliberately misunderstood, because when you see the film, it's actually a quite positive message. There were people who defended the campaign and were against it, absolutely. And it is an advertising campaign, but we were bombarded. And even people who tried to defend it was like, got so much pressure on them, so they took back their comments.
The campaign received a huge reaction. This was the statement from the airline SAS. When analysing the pattern and volume of reactions, we have reason to suspect an online attack and that the campaign has been hijacked. We do not want to risk being a platform for views that we do not share. Did you expect that reaction?
No, not that kind of reaction. No, not at all. We expected a reaction, yes, and we expected a debate around it, but not at all in such a negative and political way. It just shows how different the world is nowadays in terms of being either on one side or the other. I mean, and the environment around debating stuff is going in the wrong direction. For me, it's important that in the ability to do creative stuff that actually touches emotions one way or the other is extremely important to get people's attention. If we do not have that and the ability to think outside the box, the world of advertising would die.
I think it's really important that we have a healthy discussion. People should get angry, people should get happy, and we should have a discussion with each other that is open. For me, at least, I hope that we can keep on doing that and not cross a line where it becomes something else.
Thank you, Robert Serkes and Michael Jurgensen. And you can still view the We Are Travellers campaign advert online. As we just heard, appealing to consumers' emotions is fundamental in advertising. And with growing concerns about climate change, projecting an eco-friendly image for products is increasingly important. So much so that some companies are overselling their eco-credentials, a practice known as greenwashing. Enter Creatives for Climate, a global network of advertising professionals promoting environmental action in the industry. Co-director Melissa Mbugwa from Nairobi in Kenya explains.
Creatives for Climate has a total of 3,000 individual members. We launched the Greenwash Watch course in August, a 4-week program designed to guide advertising industry professionals in spotting when greenwashing is happening and how to take action within their organizations. One company that's very big beverage brand in Africa and in the rest of the world has been running a campaign for years around them being sustainable because of their use of recycled single-use plastic bottles. This is greenwashing because it's been proved that recycling is not sustainable. The most effective thing to do is to stop using plastics altogether. Yet this brand continues to run this campaign, successfully so because of the fact that a lot of the audience isn't fully aware. Another example of greenwashing that you might come across in your everyday life is in the supermarket. You might find lots of food products with the stamp that says organic, plant-based. A lot of times this is literally only package level messaging. If you package your product in a way that just looks like, it's the color green, it's got imagery that we as the consumers associate with wellness, environmental friendliness, they probably don't even need to make any claims, but they'll have implied they are sustainable. I think there are a couple of reasons why corporations engage in this practice of greenwashing. It is expensive and difficult to transition from fossil fuel reliant operation into fully renewable energy. The second reason is that from a recent survey of 17 African countries, it turns out that an average of almost half of the population isn't aware of climate change. If you ask people what is climate change, it's like, it's something that the industrialized nations talk about and they're fixing it. we don't really have enough capacity to tackle it. And so a lot of greenwashing happens because there's lack of information, there's just not enough coordination within people who are in this media and advertising and communications industry to present a unified story around what's true. A few weeks ago, there's a global PR agency, in response to pressure from groups in South Africa and other parts of the world, cancelled its contract with a fossil fuel company. So we're starting to see a few examples of how this pressure works. We are not at a tipping point yet, but I think we're going to get there in a few years by industry professionals who view themselves as change agents. If these continue to grow and continue to do the good work that they're doing, I think we're going to hit a tipping point.
Thanks, Melissa and Bugwa from Creatives for Climate. Information about their new Greenwash Watch campaign can be found online. Broadcasting worldwide, I'm Tina Dahealy, and this is the Cultural Frontline on the BBC World Service. Speaking of soft drinks, do you remember when Coca-Cola swapped the name of the brand with the name of imagined customers like Diego, Kensani, Jane and Alicia on the side of the bottle? The Share a Coke campaign, which aims to deepen personal connection between people and the drink, began in Australia and was eventually rolled out across 80 countries. But in South Africa, bringing people together by putting names on a bottle proved a little more complicated, as Jonathan Woolberg and Thabang Lehobier from Johannesburg's FCB advertising agency explain.
What's your name?
My name is Bongani Oguhle Ogwamadlamani.
Sorry, what?
Coming out of a very difficult era in South Africa of segregation, we're now into our 28th year of democracy, but we still find ourselves in a situation where we can't say each other's names correctly because we have 11 official languages and all of our African languages. And so it becomes quite difficult as a result of that segregation for all of us to be on like a level playing field when it comes to pronunciation. Coca-Cola had this global campaign of names on cans, and when we had the opportunity to reinvigorate that in our market, we obviously had to represent each name and each culture so that everyone could find a Coke in a fridge with their name on it in their own language.
Thabang, is it something you've experienced in your own life, mispronunciation of your name?
We experience mispronunciations all the time. Sometimes you might have to repeat the name as you introduce yourself like about 3 times and you still don't get it. It does feel a bit awkward, but as well, there's a certain level of tolerance that comes with it. In such a country as ours, you're able to understand that they have to learn, and that's what this campaign does.
So what we did is we didn't just put people's names on cans across all of our 11 languages. We added the phonetic to each name to teach people how to say the names correctly. We had billboards, we had television ads, we had the web series, we went out to schools. All of our languages are very unique and they have very specific sounds. There are a lot of clicking sounds within the African languages. There's a lot of guttural rolling sounds in the Afrikaans language. Some of the more interesting names for me, just because my mouth isn't trained to say certain sounds, was a man by the name of Mangoba and a name that starts with an X, which is called a side mouth click. So a name like Olisi was also an interesting name.
Thabang, you came up with a specific tool to help with that pronunciation, didn't you? Can you tell me about how that works and how it came about?
We looked into one of the most intrinsic things that we could find on the brand, and that is the clicking sound that you'd have when 2 people are toasting. From that, we thought it would be amazing to actually visualize it in such a way that different clicks that you find in Xhosa and in Zulu could be visualized by some pictograms. Some of the names that we used, such as Xolisa, for instance. So Xolisa has the clicking sound, so you'd have an icon that illustrates the click, then you'd have the broken down phonetic of how the name is actually pronunciated. So in that way, it gives you almost how in the dictionary the name would be pronounced. So in that way, we're also relating the clicking sound to the intrinsics of the brand itself.
There is a phonetic alphabet that exists, and we thought initially that we could use the phonetic alphabet, which is international, to work within our names. And we quickly found out that because of the special sounds that we have within a lot of our names, we had to figure out essentially a new phonetic alphabet for a lot of our names in South Africa.
You decided to confront a cultural tension head-on, an emotive subject. Wasn't that a scary place to go for an advert?
It was a big challenge, and we had to do it the right way. And obviously, with a brand like Coca-Cola, they have an existing tone, and that tone is always about optimism and bringing people closer together. And there were certain names that we had to avoid just because of some religious contexts. So yes, there was a risk, but we think the risk definitely paid off.
Tell me about some platforms reporting obscene words being printed onto cans. Put that in context for me.
So that was a very isolated incident where we created a vending machine that you could speak to and tell the vending machine your name. Obviously, inside the vending machine were people who were shrink wrapping cans with the person's name. So they would hear the name, input it onto a system, and it would print it out. And there was an isolated incident where someone put a rude name on a can that the person printing it wouldn't have known because they didn't speak the language. There were lots of challenges, essentially making a new phonetic alphabet. That was a massive task. We didn't get it 100% right on every single name. You know, we did our best to get them all right, and to our knowledge, we got them all over the line.
And we are talking specifically about Coca-Cola here. Are there any other soft drink campaigns that have also impressed you, Jonathan?
Recently, there was a Pepsi campaign that was done to strengthen the association between Pepsi and fast food. And it was a very clever print campaign that was printed and done on social media, where various fast food packaging was made to look unintentionally crumpled. And wherever the blue and the white and the red intersected in that packaging, it created the Pepsi logo. And it just said better together, which I thought was really smart.
Thank you, Jonathan Wahlberg and Tabang Lehobier. Finally, how does advertising differ when the product is a person? With the US midterm elections happening next month, it's estimated campaigners will spend a staggering $9 billion on adverts promoting their candidates. To find out more, I spoke to Tassine Rabi, video producer at media company Bloomberg, who worked on the Bernie Sanders 2020 campaign for the Democratic Party nomination for president, alongside Toby Berkowitz, associate professor of advertising at Boston University, who's consulted on campaigns for Democrats in more than 30 states. Toby began by explaining the different genres of US political commercials.
Right now, and actually for the last 20 years, the most popular is sort of the slasher movie, where you have creepy audio, weird video, sound effects. And so that tends to be one. It tends to get people's attention. Very talented consultants can also use humor. It's much more challenging, but that's a very successful way to break through the clutter, and also sometimes use humor to attack your opponent.
Donald Trump has taken advantage of that slasher horror type style video. Time and time again, we see that he's also using humor to kind of get his audience to pay attention to him. In 2020, he was using a movie about gun violence. He was just like shooting people up, but it performed really well on social video, on social media.
Another could just be sort of what we call a walk me, talk me. The candidate is strolling through either a neighborhood or a factory or a senior center with all sorts of other people. Another genre could be sort of the whodunit, a mystery, and the opponent is the bad person who did something bad, and they sort of harangue them for a while.
How strongly do the candidates feel about the direction they want the ad to go in? Do they impose their editorial ideas on that process?
From my experience on the Bernie 2020 campaign, the candidate himself did not have that much of a say. There are times when he's like, oh, this would be a cool idea, or this is something that would be a good advertisement, but most of the time it's the campaign manager themselves or the creative director on the campaign.
Toby, is there a gap between what politicians want to say and what voters want to hear in these adverts?
Frequently, there is a gap because the politicians are going after what they think is going to be most effective. That's not necessarily what the voters want in terms of their elected officials. So sometimes there is a disconnect there. Also, the political ads spend most of their time attacking their opponent. Sometimes the voters, in fact, would prefer to hear what a candidate stands for, how it's going to help them and their family. But that's very complicated, and sometimes you can get in trouble trying to address what people want because not everybody wants the same thing. So it's just easier to attack your opponent. And this is part of the problem with American political advertising is it's so negative that it alienates a lot of people and it alienates them from the political process.
And are there certain perennial issues that lend themselves more readily to these adverts, Toby?
Things tend to change over time. Right now, for instance, abortion is a major issue. Abortion's always been important, but after the Supreme Court decision that it's up to the states to decide whether there will be a right to an abortion in different states, this has become a major issue, especially for the Democrats, for many women. And this is very important for women in the suburbs, which is very much a swing vote. And frequently, these close elections are decided by the suburbs. So that could be a major issue in terms of who's going to win and what commercials are talking about during this campaign cycle. On the Republican side, you can go back decades and they've been fighting about crime. So you sort of have different topics, different issues that matter very much to the voters of one party or the other.
I think the typical ones are jobs, healthcare, education, gun policies, climate change. But this year especially, we're seeing a focus on abortion, inflation, and gas prices.
Toby, tell me a bit more about the place of the attack ad.
They became really popularized in 1964 when the Johnson for President campaign attacked Barry Goldwater with a series of ads, the most famous of which is called the Daisy Girl ad. And it's a cute little girl pulling petals off a daisy, and all of a sudden it blows up into an atomic bomb. This is probably the most famous of all political ads in America. You go then to 1988, and George Bush the Elder had a series of vicious attack ads against Mike Dukakis, who was the Democratic candidate.
To see, with digital advertising via social media becoming increasingly important, are there particular changes to the way the message is conveyed in political ads online specifically?
Yeah, we're seeing time and time again this new docu-style video becoming popularized, where we would see the candidate have a heartfelt moment with his voters in a very organic way, casually walking down the street. That organic moment really resonated with viewers, and we'd see that those were the kinds of videos that outperformed.
I think one of the trends that we're going to be seeing is political adverts are going to look more and more like TikTok videos. That's been sort of the cultural trend, and I think it will also be the aesthetic trend. And by the time we get to 2024, TikTok's really going to be the model for how a lot of advertising is done.
Toby, can you tell me about your best and worst adverts?
Well, the best really in terms of history of the United States, you go back to the Reagan 1984 campaign. And this is really when the Reagan people did ads like Morning in America. Very inspirational. It was done by an advertising person named Hal Riney, very famous ad copywriter. And he had a great voice. He actually did his own voiceover, very inspirational music.
I did love the America ad. I think that the use of music in this ad was beautiful. It showed the working class. It kind of resonated with the American people in a way that most other ads don't.
They did another ad that was very odd called The Bear, which was about the threat of Russia, but very allegorical, which is so different from most of advertising.
There's a video, the Everybody Let's Vote video by Joe Biden in 2020. That was a pretty boring, dull video. It's just got this hype music behind it. It's very basic, and it goes, Joe Biden, let's vote. Kamala Harris, let's vote. And it says nothing, it does nothing. It's just sugar, candy, and it means nothing to the viewer.
And the most effective Republican ads right now are attacking Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, who is the Speaker of the House, showing all the things they've done that have damaged America. And it's sort of this laundry list litany of bad legislation, what the Democrats have done to inflation, to gas prices. So it's really more of a general approach that the Republicans have been using. And perhaps that's going to work in terms of getting the independent voters, the people in the middle, to think that the Democrats are worse than the Republicans and maybe get their vote that way.
Thank you, Toby Berkowitz and Tassine Rabi. That's it for this week's programme. We'll be here same time next week with more stories of artists changing the world and the way we see it. Until then, goodbye.
This is the BBC World Service, and on this week's assignment...
In Argentina, inflation is roaring towards 100%. Prices change so often it's difficult to keep track. I'm Jane Chambers. Join me to find out how Argentines from all walks of life manage to get by.
Journeys to the heart of a story. Assignment at bbcworldservice.com/assignment. In 30 minutes, it's World of Wisdom.
I am Sana Safi. We offer self-help for the spirit. All over the world, people are reassessing their lives right now. We unite them with a wise guide to help all of us listening.
This is the BBC World Service, the world's radio station.
Hello, I'm Connie Sharp on the BBC World Service, and this is BBC OS Conversations, protests in Iran. During the past fortnight, we have been witnessing extraordinary protests across the country. It followed the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini. She died in hospital after collapsing and falling into a coma at a detention centre. We've been bringing Iranian women together to share their stories, including some who have been taking to the streets to protest. We've also been talking with those who have been arrested and getting the reflections of those who have left the country, but are still dealing with the emotional ramifications of an encounter with the so-called morality police.
When I see a green van, I get terrified. Sometimes I even keep reaching to fix my scarf, but there's nothing there, of course. Sometimes I look outside and I see women walking, and for a moment I'm shocked. I'm like, what if she gets arrested? The effects they have on us, they never finish.
All after the latest BBC News.
Hello, I'm Eileen McHugh with the BBC News. Ukrainian forces say they've taken control of the key town of Liman. An aide to President Zelensky has posted a video showing soldiers throwing Russian flags off the roof of the main administration building. In his nightly address, Mr. Zelensky predicted more areas would be liberated within the week.
Український прапор вже в Лимані, Донецької області.
The Ukrainian flag is already in Liman, Donetsk region. It's logical for Ukraine and for the enemy. There will be more and more such mismatches. They, by the way, have already started squabbling with each other. They're looking for the culprits, blaming some generals for the failures.
A Russian Defense Ministry spokesman in Moscow, Igor Konashenkov, admitted that Russian forces had been withdrawn, but he said Ukraine had paid a heavy price.
Despite the losses incurred, the enemy introduced reserves and continued its offensive in this direction. Because of the threat of encirclement, Allied forces were withdrawn from the settlement of Krasny Liman.
The town is in Donetsk, one of 4 Ukrainian regions annexed by Russia on Friday. Burkina Faso's deposed leader has called on his rivals to come to their senses and avoid infighting after a coup on Friday. Paul-Henri Damiba, who took power in a military takeover earlier this year, was making his first statement since being overthrown. Mr. Damiba denied taking refuge at a French military base. There are reports of a fire outside the French embassy. The BBC's Miney Jones says there's mistrust of France among protesters.
when they heard on Saturday afternoon the new junta saying that the old leader of the country, Paul-Henri Damiba, was seeking refuge some of them took to the streets and decided to target the French consulate. This is despite the fact country Paul-Henri Damiba was seeking refuge with the French army. That angered a lot of people in Burkina Faso, and some of them took to the streets and decided to target the French consulate. This is despite the fact that the French have repeatedly denied any involvement in this conflict. They say they're not harboring anyone, and they say that they haven't taken part in the coup.
President Biden has announced that Venezuela has released 7 Americans detained by the government of President Nicolas Maduro. Among them are 5 former executives of Venezuela's US-based oil company Citgo, who were jailed 5 years ago, accused of terrorism. In exchange for their freedom, Mr. Biden has agreed to release 2 relatives of Mr. Maduro who are in prison in the US. Iran has allowed an Iranian-American man who was detained 6 years ago to leave the country. Bagher Namazi, a former UNICEF official, had travelled to the country to campaign for the release of his son, Siamak, who was arrested in 2015. Both of them were convicted of espionage. The younger Mr. Namazi has also been temporarily let out of jail. World News from the BBC. As the clean-up operation after Hurricane Ian gets underway in the southeastern United States, the number of deaths has been rising. The authorities in Lee County in Florida say at least 35 people have died there. Power has been restored in most of the Cuban capital, Havana, following 3 days of widespread blackouts caused by Hurricane Ian. Cuba was already going through a serious energy crisis when the storm hit the west of the island on Tuesday. The 2 front-runners in Brazil's presidential election have held their final rallies ahead of Sunday's vote. President Jair Bolsonaro gathered thousands of his supporters on a motorbike ride through the streets of Sao Paulo. A few kilometres away, the left-wing former leader, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, took part in a march. Lula is leading all opinion polls. The BBC's Laura Trevelyan is in Rio de Janeiro.
This is being seen as the most significant election in Brazil since the country threw off the military dictatorship in the 1980s and became once again a democracy. And the reason is because President Jair Bolsonaro, the incumbent, he has very close ties with Brazil's military, and he is already questioning the integrity of Brazil's election system. To Lula da Silva, who himself is also a colourful and controversial character, former President Lula da Silva. He was actually jailed for corruption and convicted, and then his conviction was annulled, so he's back and able to run again.
Buckingham Palace has confirmed that King Charles, a lifelong environmental campaigner, will not attend the Global Climate Change Conference, COP27, in Egypt later this year. The palace was responding to a British newspaper report that he'd been told not to go by the Prime Minister Liz Truss, despite planning to do so before he acceded the throne last month. A Downing Street source said it was ridiculous to suggest that Liz Truss was giving orders to the monarch.
Hello, I'm Connie Sharp on the BBC World Service, and this is BBC OS Conversations on protests in Iran. Those protests followed the death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, who was being held in police custody. We've been bringing together Iranian women and a couple of men, both at home and abroad. And inevitably, the discussion tends to move towards experiences with the morality police.
You don't know if it's just an inconvenience, they just give you a warning, sometimes politely, sometimes actually they can be very aggressive. Like once he told me, if you don't cover your hair now, I'll set you on fire right here, right now.
The morality police is the Gasht-e-Irshad, or guidance patrols. These are special police units tasked with ensuring the respect of Islamic morals and detaining people who are perceived to be improperly dressed. Under Iranian law, which is based on the country's interpretation of Sharia, women must cover their hair with a hijab, a headscarf, and wear long, loose-fitting clothing to disguise their figures. Mahsa Amini was Kurdish and died 3 days after her arrest for allegedly breaking those rules. The police have denied reports that officers beat her head with a baton and banged it against one of their vehicles. What we have witnessed in response is something quite extraordinary. as day after day, women have taken to the streets to burn their headscarves. The reported numbers who have died in the ensuing protests varies. State media have said it is more than 40, including security personnel. Others put it higher. More than 1,000 have been arrested. Now, one of the women we managed to speak to in Iran is Sarah, although we changed her name for safety reasons. She is one of the protesters. Talking to my colleague James Reynolds, she began by describing her feelings on hearing about Mahsa's death.
I burst into tears. It was terrible because it happened to other people. Their names exceeded more than hundreds. But the difference for her, it was that she was quite young. She was visiting her family here. I don't know if you saw her appearance or her clothing. It was quite right, nothing to be concerned about. But they took her and they insult her. And this is not something acceptable for no one in Iran, even the religious one. They're shocked.
Tell me about your decision to join protesters.
This is not my first time. This is a deep decision behind all of this protest. This is overthrowing the regime, the Islamic regime.
How much freedom do you have to live your life as you would like to live it?
There is no freedom in Iran for having a life that we want to live. For example, if I want to sing as a solo singer, there is no possibility for me. If I want to dance as a solo dancer, there is no possibility for me. Half of the occupations I cannot be because of my gender, because of Islamic rules that they applied in our country. So there is no freedom for us.
When you leave the house, the law as it stands means that you have to put on a headscarf as a woman. What goes through your mind?
That I'm someone else, that I'm living a life that is not belong to me, that, there is a lot of hate. I'm a traveler. There is a life that when I'm outside of Iran is absolutely different with the one that I'm inside. So I know that how the life could be for me and every woman in that country, but I am deprived from that kind of life because of the minority that have the gun, power, everything that can force us to do so.
Those protests, of course, come with a real possibility of physical danger.
In our culture, the death is a part of life, so you're going to die. The matter is the time of that and the reason for that. If I'm going to die for a good reason, for my people, for human rights, that would be an honor.
Sarah, who has been protesting in Iran despite the risks. And we'll be bringing you a conversation between two other protesters a little later on in the program. Iran's president has said he could not allow people to disturb the peace of society through riots. So we wanted to know what it is like to be arrested by the morality police. We got in touch with Pania, who's 45 and lives in the UK. She spent most of her teenage years in Iran and still visits family here. Ilya left Iran 2 years ago and now lives in Turkey. And Zainab, who's in her late 20s and also lives in Turkey. Zainab left Iran only a few years ago and said her encounters with the morality police when she was just 22 played a large role in why she left the country.
I've been arrested a couple of times by the hijab police, let's call them that. So what they do is that there's a huge van and there's like one or two, let's say, police cars following them. They ask you to show them their ID. They keep reassuring you that, oh, we're not going to take you, we're not arresting you, nothing's going to happen. But then once you're in the van, then that's it. There is nothing. You cannot get out of it and they just take you. If you resist at that point in the street or in the van, then they start beating you. When I was arrested, in front of us on the street, one of the girls, she resisted and they beat her quite brutally until she was unconscious. And then they took her somewhere else. I don't know where they took her.
Did the police say what they were arresting you for?
For wearing hijab improperly.
Were you able to make a defense?
This is not the situation where you're free to talk or you can object or resist. It's simple. You go with them or you get beaten. There's no lawyer or no court here.
Zainab, how long were you held for?
Couple of hours. They took our pictures, like criminal pictures, And they gave us some papers to sign to say that we are so sorry and we will never do this again. And of course, we had to call someone to bring us proper clothes. We wouldn't be allowed to get out before that. And all the while they were threatening us with things like, oh, we will call your family and we will put you in prison. And if you resist, we will do this and we will do that.
When you say do this, do that, what do you think they meant?
We all know what they meant. So first it's beat us, and then of course it's the threat of being arrested, long sentences, lashes, or maybe rape.
And when you hear them saying that to you, knowing what they're threatening, how in those few hours did you respond in your mind?
Paralyzing fear. That's what it was. And it's that feeling that you get that you're hopeless. It's not like we can appeal to them to have mercy on us or something like that. As we have seen, they've arrested her and she died.
Zainab, what was the long-term effect on you of that experience and of hearing the experiences of so many other people you know?
So for me, the place that I was arrested, I never went back to that street. I just can't. To this day, even though I'm not in Iran for years now, when I see a green van, immediately I get that fear. I get terrified. Sometimes I even keep reaching to fix my scarf, but there's nothing there, of course. Sometimes I look outside and I see women walking, and for a moment I'm shocked. I'm like, what if she gets arrested? It's like I'm outside of the country, but the effects that these activities they have on us, they never finish. They never end.
Let's bring in Parnia, who's currently here in the UK. Do tell us of your own experiences.
I think, Zainab, when you said paralyzing fear, that's exactly how I would describe it. I was in Iran from the age of 6 till 15. And it starts with when you go to school at the age of 6, you're forced to wear this. They just want to brainwash you for you to think that you have to wear this. You know, you get so used to it. And then you grow older and you become an adult and they stop you because they just sometimes don't like the way you're wearing it, or is the color that they don't like. And it is that fear that just basically engulfs your body and your knees go like jelly. Once I remember I was 12, my mom was in her 30s, my brother was only 5. We were out in a restaurant in a very popular place. A lot of families were out there outside the restaurant having pizzas. And then suddenly they arrived. One of them put in his head and shoulders inside the car with my 5-year-old brother with his gun. And he said, if you don't cover your hair, I'll shoot you. When they arrest you, you don't know if it's just an inconvenience. They just give you a warning, sometimes politely, but humiliating. Sometimes actually they can be very aggressive. Like once he told me, if you don't cover your hair now, I'll set you on fire right here, right now. And sometimes, like Zainab said, if you get in the van, that's it. And then you don't know if it's just going to be a fine. Is it going to be lashes? Are they going to keep you in a cell for a few days? One day, I remember my aunt really begged my mum to take me on a little trip holiday. She was invited by her friend's family. On the first day, my aunt asked me to go and get something from the corner shop. I was only about 13, and they sent their teenage boy with me because he knew where the shop was. 5 minutes later, as we're walking towards the shop, they arrested us. They separated us. They didn't let us talk to each other like we were criminals. They took us to a police station. Still, we can't talk. I was put in a cell. I was 12. They didn't let us call home. At home, they didn't know what had happened to us. This was meant to be a 15-minute trip. My aunt was so horrified because they just didn't know where we were for 6 or 7 hours. Eventually, they found us. I was lucky. I left with just a warning. The interactions were really humiliating. It was really disgusting the way they talked to you.
Panya, thank you for telling us about your experiences. And in Iran, government regulations on public behaviour affect men as well as women. And that's why we have on the line Ilya, who's 26. Ilya, do tell us about your own experiences.
About 10 or 12 years ago, me and my sister went to Tajrish Square in Tehran for breakfast. On that day, the morality police was strolling around Tajrish Square and we got arrested on the suspicion that me and my sister were boyfriends and girlfriends. My sister's 3 years younger than me, and at that age, she was probably 10 or 12 years old. And that experience traumatized her for many years. We were kept inside a building and we had to wait a couple of hours for our parents to come with documents to prove that we're siblings. This is an event that has happened in 21st century. Brothers and sisters being arrested on the suspicion that they might be boyfriends and girlfriends. Another instance, me and my friend were coming back from high school. It was during the month of Ramadan. He had a bottle of water in his hand. He wasn't drinking it. He had not opened the water bottle. And the morality police, they arrested him and he was lashed 72 times for the simple crime of holding a water bottle during Ramadan.
When I hear stories like this, because there are thousands and thousands of other stories like this, I feel anger at the situation, at the condition, at how they could have treated us like criminals.
Yeah, for me as well, it's anger. And even though the last time I went to Iran was 8 years ago, and when they stopped me, I thought, this will be the last time. I'm never going to come back again till this regime goes. I haven't taken my English husband back home because I don't want him to see me with a headscarf. That's how humiliating I find it. We were forced to wear it from the age of 6, and from the age of 6, I hated wearing it because it was humiliating and just uncomfortable. Kids were restricted. We wanted to play. It was hot. It was awful. I still have nightmares about it.
I'm angry as well, but I'm also hopeful. Seeing the sites that we're seeing coming out of the social media, despite the fact that the internet has been blocked out, has been giving me so much hope for some form of positive change.
I agree with Ilya. For me personally, I felt fear only, but I see people in the street, they're turning their fear to anger and they're using that anger to oppose the regime any way that they can. Or nothing, absolutely nothing, they are fighting the war and they're using that anger to oppose the regime any way that they can, with nothing in their hands but only stones or paper or nothing, absolutely nothing, they are fighting the regime. I feel immense hope. I'm sure that something good is going to happen.
Yeah, I'm sure about it too. This time is different because the government is extremely weak. People have never been so united as they are now. This was really a catalyst for all this. This is not the first time. This is like 43 years of misery. And people are so united, and our anger and hatred is so much more than our fear now. So I'm very hopeful for a bright future for Iran.
Zainab in Turkey and Pania in the UK. We also brought together two other Iranians who live abroad, a woman we are going to call Sheda, as she didn't want to use her real name, and Mahsa. They both live in London.
Even men, that aren't necessarily the morality police or other people, even religious vigilante women, give themselves the right to question how you appear in public is just very psychologically, very traumatizing, I think, for women, because just the fact that you can be going about your daily life and having these interactions, they really tear away at your mental health. Just like a couple weeks ago, someone very close to me in Iran got several text messages, but they were just getting warnings, and it said they had 3 strikes before they had to actually go into that exact same police station that Mahsa or Jina Amini was in before her tragic death. The fear of this is even more. I mean, we've told my family member to not go to that station under any condition. When I have been on the streets of Iran, it's always been kind of a game of, oh, I think that car might be the morality police. Let's take a turn on this other street to avoid them. I had encountered different men who gave themselves the right to comment on the way I was dressed. I remember my first experience was being very young, being about 12 years old and wearing capri pants on the streets where my family is. And this boy who was maybe 3 years older than me was giving himself the right to basically ankles were out.
When I was in Iran, I observed hijab. I was very religious.
The right to basically tell me that, in so many words, I looked like a slut because my ankles were out.
When I was in Iran, I observed hijab. I was very religious. But at some point, 3 years ago, I removed my hijab and I made it public on social media. You can imagine what reaction I got from public audience. Although I was insisting that, yeah, I'm still religious, but I just don't believe this part of jurisprudence. They felt that they can say anything because I decided to show my hair to other people.
Some observers have said that this is unprecedented, the protest. So do you feel like it might be a bit different this time around?
The oppression has been going on for ages. The nature of protests are different. Different social groups have been involved that are from very diverse. Economically, religiously, they're from all different social groups. And also the new generation is involved. People who are, 20 years younger than me. I'm 34. They are like 14, 15, or 20. They have access to the internet, to free flow of information from childhood. So they haven't been brainwashed by Islamic republics.
The narrative and the way of protest, the way it's taking shape, has been inspiring, if not iconic, but at the same time you have those positive feelings. You're very much aware that it's happening right now as we're seeing massive internet shutdowns and disruptions. Positive feelings. You're very much aware that the security forces have been prepared for moments like this. It's happening right now as we're seeing massive internet shutdowns and disruptions across the country that, the videos you're seeing of people being inspiring, like that person might have been shot at very soon after that video. So it's this combination of encouragement and just fear, because if anything good is going to come out of these protests, it's not going to come without massive bloodshed.
Mahsa and Shada, two Iranians now living in London. Now, getting through to people in Iran isn't easy because of internet restrictions that were mentioned in our previous conversations. Sarah, who you heard from at the top of the program, was originally going to be joining our next two guests, but it proved too difficult to get a reliable connection. But we did make contact with Tara and Ali, which are not their real names. However, in order to hear from them, James had to send recorded questions. Tara and Ali then each recorded their answers and sent them to us. The first voice message asked about going out to protest.
It's a scene to watch and to feel and take part. It's great to see our youth trying to get their fate in their own hands, to see women leading the crowd. It's not that it's not violent, it's not that it's peaceful. We're talking about guns and military-grade bullets shot at us. But I've never seen my people, Iranian people, this united. Iranian society is not a homogenized society. We have so many different ethnicities, different religions, but this time people are united. I've never seen this before. I've been in protests since 2009. I've followed them and I've taken part in them, but this time is very different.
Going out to protest in a small city is, I think, a bit different than protesting in cities like Tehran or Isfahan, because in our city, people are completely unpolitical. When I say people, I usually mean old people. Our parents have always prevented us from being politically active. People are socially conservative, especially because people had experience of deadly, bloody suppression the very first year after the Islamic Revolution. When there was call out for protest in Twitter, I really didn't think that really there would be enough population in the street. But when I saw people chanting, "Down with dictator," I was really thrilled.
Have you been scared?
It's a scary place to be. You get scared when bullets are shot at you, when you hear the bullets, when you see someone down, shot, you see the brutality of regime. But the fear is not enough to get me out of the streets. And I hope that people feel the same.
I was excited that Turkmen people were alongside Persian people and other people chanting in a united protest against dictatorship. that exact moment, I know that being scared about armed force and police was not the point for me. And then we chanted and we walked alongside each other. And after I burnt my scarf, and there was no scarf on my head, and one of my friends there said that you should have bring along a scarf, and I answered it was against the old meaning of burning your scarf. So after that, I know when I was hijabless, at that moment I was a bit scared and went to a safe place and called my friends to come after me.
Tell me a bit about what your day-to-day life is like right now.
It's very frustrating. It's very stressful. I wake up checking the news, checking Twitter, Instagram. My job involves traveling. I check Twitter for some locations that protests are taking place. I go there. I normally buy some water, some masks, something that can help people. The funny thing is I'm considered old now. I was a university student in 2009, and mostly the younger people are taking the action. They are fighting back against the police. There's a lot of women. It's really beautiful to see that women are fighting and even leading the crowd. And actually I feel good when I'm protesting, and even though life is stressful and frustrating, but there's some hope in me that the outcome would be better.
My day-to-day life is in complete disorder right now. I can't work because my job completely relies on net. I can go outside and protest every minute possible. There is no hope for a better future.
Tara and Ali in Iran, who sent us those voice messages to pre-recorded questions, which proved the best way to make contact with them. I'm Connie Sharp, and you've been listening to BBC OS Conversations, Protests in Iran.
This is the BBC World Service, where Ruth Omar investigates ongoing sexual violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo.
For the younger Congolese generation like me, war has been like a constant presence in our lives. Despite a UN security resolution in 2008 making rape and other forms of sexual violence a war crime, it continues.
It is difficult to bring a soldier to court, and also you still suffer the shame, humiliation.
Sexual violence isn't only happening in conflict areas in the DRC. It is a much wider problem of social, political, and historical dynamics.
It's being so widespread that even victims are normalizing the issue.
I will be exploring why this problem persists in the Congo, and I'll be hearing from the women and men fighting for change.
Peace and Justice, Sexual Violence in the DRC, Tuesday at 8 and 19 GMT.
Do you ever have a nagging sensation of guilt? A feeling that gnaws away at you? Maybe you sense that if you did something positive, that feeling might go away. Perhaps you think it will always be with you, whatever you do. This week on World of Wisdom, we will be exploring that powerful negative feeling, guilt. Rabbi Label Wolf will be working with Anna from Switzerland on a feeling she has had since she was 3. Join us after the BBC News.
BBC News. Ukrainian forces say they've taken control of the key town of Liman. An aide to President Zelensky has posted a video showing soldiers throwing Russian flags off the roof of the main administration building. Moscow had already announced the withdrawal of its forces in what appears to be a significant defeat for its military. Burkina Faso's deposed leader has called on his rivals to come to their senses and avoid infighting after Friday's coup. Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Damiba, who took power in another military takeover earlier this year, was making his first statement since being overthrown. He denied he had taken refuge at a French military base. President Biden has announced that Venezuela has released 7 American citizens detained by the government of President Nicolas Maduro. Among them are 5 former executives of Venezuela's US-based oil company Citgo, who were jailed 5 years ago accused of terrorism. In exchange, Mr. Biden has agreed to release 2 relatives of Mr. Maduro who are in prison in the US. The last opinion polls released in Brazil ahead of Sunday's presidential election suggest the left-wing former leader, Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, will have enough votes to win in the first round. President Jair Bolsonaro is trailing his rival by 14 percentage points. Equatorial Guinea is asking the International Court of Justice to block the sale of a multi-million-dollar mansion in Paris, which belonged to the country's vice president. The property was seized after a French court convicted Théodorine Nguema Obiang Mangue of embezzling public money in 2017. And Buckingham Palace has confirmed that King Charles, a lifelong environmental campaigner, will not attend the Global Climate Change Conference in Egypt later this year. The palace was responding to a report that he'd been told not to go by the British Prime Minister Liz Truss. BBC News.
This is the BBC World Service. I'm Sana Safi, and welcome to World of Wisdom, where we explore some of the personal, moral, or even spiritual issues that we come across in life. This episode focuses on that powerful negative feeling, guilt. It can feel like a stain on the soul, or a positive inspiration to action. Either way, it is something I have to admit that I struggle with myself sometimes. For that reason, I was particularly interested in what our new advisor, Rabbi Label Wolf from Australia, would say on the subject. Anna contacted us from Switzerland. This is the shortened version of a long discussion they had together.
I feel guilty all the time. Everything I see or experience evokes some kind of guilt. I often feel I should have done more, or that I should have done things differently, or not at all. I've lived with these feelings as long as I can remember. I try to ignore them when I'm not busy, when I'm unaware, or worse, when I'm tired or gloomy, they just jump at me from behind. Keeping guilt away requires so much energy. I would love to find a way to deal constructively with these feelings, not having to constantly fight them or drown in them, to live a complete life in a thankful and humble way.
Firstly, I want to say it's an honor to have the opportunity to share someone else's life, compare notes, and be able to see whether between the two of us we can help each other. Can you share with me perhaps a little bit what's your day like? What do you do?
There's several segments of my life. One, I'm a professional woman. I have a consultant agency, and right now I'm sitting in different boards of hospitals and of one big hospital group. Now I'm the president, so I preside this board. And there's quite a lot to do, as you can imagine. And I look after my grandchildren at least one day a week. So I think my life is quite fulfilled, and there's no bitter part in my actual life.
And was there any particular stage in your life where you started to be more aware that these bouts of guilt were arising within you?
Oh, yes, that was very early on, maybe when I was 3 or 4 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And it started with a feeling of shame.
It's interesting you introduced the word shame. Guilt is such a big word. And at the very same time, ironically, it's extremely hard to define. Would you say that guilt has more a mind component or an emotion component?
It's primarily emotional, but it comes from some thoughts, like I shouldn't have done this, or I think I have not done enough for a member of my family, or I have not worked hard enough to solve a specific problem. Right now with the Ukraine crisis, I think I should do something. I cannot just sit around and do nothing. I'm in this state of, I desperately want to do something, but I can't. I'm like paralyzed.
We will probably correctly describe that as some sense of inner conflict. There's things pulling you in different directions at the very same time. I think it might be useful if we propose this model that I was taught by my teachers. The reason why we always experience conflict within is because we have two equal and opposite tendencies. One is towards our own security. It's a tendency also to enjoy pleasure. It's self-oriented. We might even say it's ego-oriented. And that in our Jewish spiritual tradition, we call nefesh bahamis, a much baser instinct. But we have also an equal and competitive tendency within us, and that's the quest for altruism, for otherness, for compassion. And these two tendencies compete with each other constantly. You strike me as a person where circumstances that you might see either injustice or inadequacy of some kind, you've taken it upon your shoulders to feel strongly for that. But there is that other side of self that says quietly, well, you know you can't do anything about that. Why are you even trying? And the result is that you feel inadequate, that you're not doing what you could be doing, even if it's illogical. These nonsensical notions that produce guilt is only the trickery of our ego self to try to somehow undermine the capacity for happiness and joy. So what's my practical piece of advice to you? I think it's absolutely wonderful the way that God created us with an inability to think of two things at the same time. You might be able to oscillate, but in the one instant, there's only one slide operating in the projector of your mind. As soon as you begin to feel guilt arising, immediately change the slide of the mind. Now, easier said than done. So I usually ask people to select from their personal history 3 occasions when they felt absolutely happy, ecstatic, so that it would be a ready slide to push the other slide out of guilt. It requires practice, etc. Does anything there resonate with you?
So I might need to have a set of slides because the situations for feeling guilty are multifold. Each time I feel guilty, I have to think, okay, for this particular situation, what would be a positive slide to flip in? And then practice that.
You're right. You're the director of your life, and therefore you can choose your slides and you can choose your experience. Let me take a slightly different tack, because I suspect, knowing what you've accomplished, that you're also a very strong person, maybe despite what you may think of yourself. So if I say things now which appear to be somewhat hurtful, I know that you'll know that it's certainly not intended as such. When you say, you know, I feel that I should do more for my family at times. I feel I should do more for my organization at times. I should do more to alleviate the plight of sick people at times. Let me ask you, and I'm saying this playfully, who do you think you are? Do you think that you're God? Do you think that you have been brought into the world to be able to solve all these problems? Should you not be a little more humble and say, you know what? I'm always placed in exactly the right situation, and where my hand can reach out and assist, that's all I am intended to do. And by trying to get all these other things tucked in, that's being egotistic. There is a little story which I'd like to share with you that comes from our tradition. It's an individual who's looking to find a city, and then he meets a young child, and he says to the young child, where is the city and how am I going to reach it? And the young child says to him, do you want the long, short way or the short, long way? Well, he thinks about it and he says, no, I want the short way. It might be called the short, long way, but I want the short way. Okay, the child says, that way. And he goes that way. And soon he's there. The towers of the city are there in front of him. But there's a problem. There's a big river which he cannot cross. He goes back to where he saw that child and he says, you told me that's the short way. And the child says, no, I said that's the short, long way. You want the long, short way, which is, if you go a bit further and longer in that direction, you'll get there. And he does, and it takes him 5-6 hours, but he's able to enter into the city. And that's what we do in life. All too often, we want to grab all the things that we see. I must solve this problem. I've got to solve that problem. And that's really the short, long way, because you don't do full justice to anything. But on the other hand, if you limit it and say, you know what, I'm going to spend more time, but I'm going to get it right on the things that have been placed within reach, you'll be much happier with yourself.
I always thought I had a mission. God put me in this world with a mission to do the most I can, to be the best I can. And if I don't live up to this mission, then I'm failing on God or on society. So the guilt comes from, maybe having the idea of leaning back, being lazy. But what you're saying is I do not have a mission. Or the mission I have is in front of me and not 20 kilometers away from me. I look at the horizon and I try to see the things I need to do there, and where in the meantime I do not see the things that are right in front of me, and I tumble over them, which makes the situation only worse.
It's a bit like a camera, isn't it?
Yeah.
You need to focus it, and you have to decide, am I wanting to look at the mountains in the distance, or do I want to look at the foreground? And in life, the foreground is placed deliberately as your foreground. And that's what you need to focus on.
Rabbi Label reminding Anna and all of us to focus on what is in front of us. Earlier in their discussion, he suggested that Anna was personally conflicted, and that was a source of her feeling of guilt. I asked him about that inner conflict, and he outlined a creation story which will be familiar to many people around the world.
When I refer to the fact that we have two opposing spiritual soul tendencies, the part of us that is egocentric and self-centered is ultimately related to Adam's eating of the tree of knowledge. So it's interesting that the Garden of Eden story gives us a template to be able to discuss what we are discussing. You have first person, Adam, you have his wife, Eve. They're the only two human beings in existence. You have a magnificent garden, but there are sections of the garden that Adam and Eve are not allowed to eat the fruit of, specifically the fruit of the tree of knowledge, good and bad. And then there's one other somewhat mysterious figure. He's referred to as the serpent. Now, in our tradition, the serpent was a humanoid creature in whom was infused all the negative tendencies which we have today internalized within us. What do I mean? When Adam ate from the tree of knowledge, good and bad, eating of that fruit internalized the sense of what is wrong, what we shouldn't do. Now, as a result of that, you and I constantly live in a conflicted state where we know things that we shouldn't do, but want to do them, and things that are right quite beyond and have no connection to that at all, which gives us, as all things do, positivity. What is it? Free choice. We have to exercise choice as to be able to move in the right direction as opposed to the wrong direction. And success in so choosing is what provides us ultimately with satisfaction and happiness, but also makes the world a much better place.
Yeah. You said that guilt is an inner conflict, and I could see myself in Anna's question in some ways, because I, for a time, felt really restless. I felt the need not just succeed, but I should do more.
And you asked her to focus on something from her personal history, something positive. And I wonder, just reminding ourselves of those moments from our history, how can that guide us to fulfill that life in a more enriching manner?
I think intuitively we recognize that happiness is much more real and true as to who I am than upset. And therefore, it's like an internal guidance mechanism. What's not understood is that happiness is not something that you can go out there and find. Happiness is a byproduct of connectedness. We call the connection love. And when we're disconnected, we have all sorts of negative feelings that arise because of that disconnect. So going into life and being able to find connections in every arena that we find ourselves in is the direction which we should seek. When we connect, we leave a spiritual footprint in the sands of time. When we connect, we're happy.
Rabbi Label Wolf there, encouraging us to connect. And I'm very happy to say we've had some lovely messages from listeners to last week's programme. Anene from Nigeria wrote, "The episode on relationships with mothers really got me.
Oh my
God.
you very much. Be careful. Oh my.
my God.